A judge tried to strip a disabled Navy SEAL of her Silver Star medal, but what happened next shook the entire nation. This isn't just a courtroom story. It's about honor, sacrifice, and a fight no gavel could silence. The wooden doors of Courtroom 6 swung open, and Commander Rachel Torres entered with her cane, tapping softly against the floor. Every step was deliberate. Her uniform jacket hung neatly over her shoulders, and pinned to it was the Silver Star medal, a symbol of her courage, a reminder of the mission that had left her permanently disabled but alive. The room went silent. Spectators, attorneys, and even the bailiff turned their eyes toward her. Rachel's sister, Emily Torres, followed close behind, offering quiet support. Emily's hand hovered near her sister's arm, ready to steady her if she faltered. Behind the bench sat Judge William Harrow, his expression sharp and unsympathetic. His reputation for being strict was well known, but his disdainful glance at Rachel's medal carried something different, something colder. He tapped his gavel lightly as if to reassert control over the room. "Commander Torres," Judge Harrow began, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is a civilian courtroom, not a military parade ground. Remove that medal before these proceedings continue." Gasps rippled through the room. Rachel stopped mid-step, her grip tightening on her cane. Her attorney, Lisa Grant, rose quickly from her chair. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "the Silver Star is not a decoration of vanity, it is a recognition of valor in combat. Commander Torres has earned the right to wear it." Judge Harrow's lips curled into a thin, dismissive line. "This courtroom recognizes only the law, not military theater," he said coldly. Rachel stood still, her gaze locked on the judge. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her. She remembered the battlefield, the sound of explosions, the cries of her teammates. That medal wasn't jewelry. It was survival. It was sacrifice. With quiet dignity she answered, "Your Honor, I don't wear this for applause. I wear it for the ones who didn't come home." The room went silent again, tension thick in the air, as the standoff between soldier and judge began. Judge William Harrow leaned forward in his chair, his gavel tapping once more in irritation. "Commander Torres," he said, his tone icy, "this is my courtroom. You will follow my rules, or I will hold you in contempt." The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered among themselves, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Here was a decorated Navy SEAL, ordered to strip away a medal that symbolized not only her sacrifice but the sacrifice of those who never made it home. Rachel's lawyer, Lisa Grant, stood tall, her voice strong. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you are asking my client to erase her identity. This isn't about courtroom decorum, it's about dignity. She is being asked to remove the very symbol of her service to this nation." Judge Harrow's eyes narrowed. "I don't tolerate grandstanding in my court, Miss Grant. This woman is here as a civilian defendant, not as some glorified war hero. Remove the medal, or I will clear this courtroom." Rachel's sister, Emily Torres, clenched her fists in the back row, whispering through gritted teeth, "How dare he?" After everything she's been through, she wanted to shout, to defend her sister, but Rachel lifted a hand slightly, signaling her to stay calm. Rachel turned her gaze back to the judge, her voice steady but tinged with defiance. "Your Honor, I may walk with a cane, but I do not bow to disrespect. This Silver Star was not given lightly. Men bled for this, friends died for this, and if wearing it offends you, then perhaps the problem isn't the medal, it's what it represents." The room erupted in murmurs. The bailiff stepped closer to Rachel as if preparing for escalation, but Lisa raised her hand sharply. "Careful," she warned, "because silencing her isn't just silencing a veteran, it's silencing every soldier who's ever fought for this country." Judge Harrow's face reddened, his pride bristling at the open challenge. The standoff was far from over. Rachel's eyes remained fixed on Judge Harrow, but her mind slipped away, back to the night that had changed everything. It was Afghanistan. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and gunfire. Rachel had led her SEAL team into a hostile valley, their mission critical: extract 2 captured soldiers before dawn. She remembered the sound of the rotor blades overhead, the stinging burn of shrapnel tearing through her leg, and the desperate cries of her teammates. "Torres, we've got to move!" Her second-in-command had shouted, dragging one of the wounded. Rachel, bleeding but unyielding, covered the rear. She had fired until her last magazine ran empty, refusing to leave anyone behind. When the rescue bird finally lifted them out of the valley, 3 men owed their lives to her refusal to quit. 2 others had not survived. Rachel could still see their faces when she closed her eyes. That was the night the Silver Star was pinned to her chest, but in her mind, It was never hers alone. It belonged to her entire team. Back in the courtroom, the judge's voice snapped her out of the memory. "Commander Torres, I will not repeat myself. Remove it." Rachel's breathing steadied. She placed her hand gently over the medal, feeling its cool metal against her palm. Her lawyer, Lisa Grant, leaned close and whispered, "Don't give him the satisfaction. Hold your ground. The law may be his arena, but honor is yours." From the gallery, Colonel David Monroe, Rachel's former commanding officer, had slipped quietly into a seat. He had come unannounced, his uniform crisp, his eyes burning with silent outrage. He had seen enough. The judge didn't realize yet. Rachel wasn't standing alone anymore. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Harrow sat with his jaw clenched, waiting for Rachel to submit. Rachel remained still, her cane pressed against the floor, her hand resting over her medal like a shield. Then, from the gallery, Colonel David Monroe rose to his feet. His presence commanded attention, his uniform radiating authority that the judge couldn't ignore. "Your Honor," Monroe said, his voice carrying across the courtroom, "may I address the court?" Judge Harrow frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "Colonel Monroe, this is not a military tribunal. You have no standing here." "On the contrary," Monroe replied, stepping forward, "I have every standing to defend the honor of one of my own. Commander Torres is not just wearing a decoration. She is wearing the memory of men who laid down their lives under her command. That medal is not vanity. It's a headstone you can carry." The audience broke into soft murmurs of agreement. Even the bailiff hesitated, glancing between Monroe and the judge. Rachel's sister, Emily, wiped away a tear, whispering, "Finally, someone's saying it." Judge Harrow's gavel cracked down. "Order! This is irrelevant. Commander Torres is here under the jurisdiction of this court. Military sentimentality does not override civilian law." Lisa Grant stepped in, her tone sharp. "Your Honor, military honors are recognized by federal law. Stripping my client of her right to wear her medal in public could very well violate constitutional protections. Do you really want to make this courtroom the battleground where you pick a fight with the Department of Defense?" The judge stiffened, his face turning pale for the briefest moment. He hadn't expected resistance this strong, nor such high-ranking witnesses stepping in. Rachel finally spoke, her voice low but unshakable. "I didn't fight wars overseas just to surrender here, in my own country." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The judge realized, for the first time, this battle was slipping from his control. The courtroom's air grew heavier with each passing second. Judge Harrow's gavel rested on the bench, but his grip on authority felt shaky. He leaned forward, his tone sharper than before. "This is my courtroom, Commander Torres. If I allow you to parade your service here, what's next? Medals, uniforms, flags? This is not the Pentagon." Rachel's jaw tightened. Her cane tapped softly against the marble floor as she shifted her weight, but her gaze never wavered. Lisa Grant, her lawyer, stepped closer to the bench. "Your Honor, let's be clear. This isn't about order in your courtroom. This is about your discomfort with what Commander Torres represents. You may have power here, but you don't have the right to humiliate a decorated veteran." The gallery erupted in murmurs again, louder this time. Emily, sitting in the second row, could no longer hold back her emotions. She stood up, her voice trembling but strong. "That medal isn't for show. My sister came home with scars you'll never see, wounds you'll never understand, and she still carries the memory of those who didn't make it. You want her to take it off? Then you're asking her to erase them too." Judge Harrow's face reddened with frustration. "Sit down, Miss Torres, or I'll have you removed." Before the bailiff could step forward, Colonel Monroe raised a hand. "Careful, Judge. Every word you say digs you deeper. You are treading on sacred ground here. That silver star has more honor than this courtroom will ever hold." The tension peaked. Harrow slammed his gavel down again, but this time the sound didn't silence the room. Instead, it felt like a challenge hanging in the air. Rachel finally broke the stalemate. Her voice was calm but piercing. "You can strip me of the medal on my chest, Judge, but you will never strip me of the blood, sacrifice, and loyalty it represents." The gallery erupted in applause before the bailiff could even react. Harrow realized the walls of his authority were beginning to crack. The applause echoed off the courtroom walls, clashing against the sharp rap of Judge Harrow's gavel. His face flushed crimson. "Enough! This is a court of law, not a theater. Commander Torres, I find you in contempt." The words hung in the air like a verdict of war. The bailiff took an uneasy step toward Rachel, but his eyes betrayed hesitation. This wasn't just another civilian defendant. This was a Navy SEAL who had bled for her country. The room buzzed with outrage. Lisa Grant slammed her hand on the defense table. Contempt? For wearing a medal that Congress itself authorized? For honoring the dead? Your Honor, you are not just overstepping, you are violating her constitutional rights. Rachel's sister, Emily, gasped. Contempt? After everything she's endured? Rachel raised her hand to calm her sister before she made things worse. Her voice was steady, like a soldier facing enemy fire. If contempt is the price of honoring my brothers, then so be it. The judge's lips twisted, but before he could respond, Colonel Monroe stepped forward, his voice like thunder. Judge Harrow, I strongly suggest you reconsider. I've spent 30 years in service, and I've seen dictators treat soldiers with more respect than you are showing here. You can jail a veteran for contempt, but you will answer to the Pentagon, to Congress, and to the American people for it. The murmurs in the gallery swelled into open defiance. Phones were raised, people were recording. Judge Harrow's arrogance was no longer confined to this courtroom, it was spilling into the world outside. For the first time, Harrow looked unsettled. His authority had always been absolute in this chamber, but now he could feel it slipping. Rachel, cane in hand, stood taller than any gavel could strike. And then, just as the judge prepared to speak again, the courtroom doors swung open with a commanding force. A new voice filled the room. That will be quite enough. Every head turned. Admiral James Fletcher had arrived. The heavy doors thudded shut behind Admiral James Fletcher as he strode into the courtroom. His uniform was immaculate, his chest decorated with rows of ribbons and medals that spoke of decades of service. Every eye followed him, and even the bailiff unconsciously straightened his stance. Judge Harrow stiffened but tried to mask his unease. "And you are?" he asked, his tones still laced with authority, though thinner now. The Admiral stopped at the center of the room, his presence overwhelming. "Admiral James Fletcher, United States Navy. I've come on behalf of the Department of Defense. I was notified of the proceedings here today, and of your attempt to force Commander Torres to remove a medal she has more than earned." Rachel's chest tightened, not from fear but from gratitude. She hadn't called for backup, but backup had arrived anyway. She exchanged a quick glance with Colonel Monroe, who gave her the smallest nod of reassurance. Harrow bristled. "Admiral or not, this is my courtroom. Military protocols do not dictate my rulings." Admiral Fletcher's gaze hardened. "You're right, Judge. But let me remind you of something. Federal law protects the right of service members and veterans to wear their decorations. The Silver Star is not an accessory. It is an official military honor recognized by Congress. By ordering its removal, you're not just insulting Commander Torres, you're treading on federal protections." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Lisa Grant seized the moment. "Your Honor, if you continue this line, you may face legal consequences far beyond contempt charges. You are risking a direct conflict with the Department of Defense." Emily whispered under her breath, tears filling her eyes. "Finally, someone's putting him in his place." Judge Harrow gripped his gavel tightly, but for the first time, his hand trembled. He had built his career on control and intimidation, but here stood men and women who answered only to a higher calling than his bench. Rachel stood taller, her silver star catching the light. For the first time since walking into the courtroom, she felt the tide turning in her favor. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Admiral Fletcher's words hung in the air. Judge Harrow clenched his jaw, but his confidence had cracked. He banged his gavel again, though the sound seemed smaller than before. "This is my courtroom," he insisted, though his voice carried less conviction. "I will not be intimidated by military presence. Commander Torres is under civilian law here, and she will follow civilian order." Rachel's attorney, Lisa Grant, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, let's be clear. Civilian law recognizes and protects Commander Torres's right to wear that medal. You may wield authority in this room, but you are not above the Constitution, nor are you above federal statutes that safeguard the honor of veterans." The Admiral folded his hands behind his back. His tone was calm, but each word was weighted with command. "Judge Harrow, I strongly advise you to think carefully before continuing down this path. What you call order is rapidly becoming misconduct." The gallery murmured in agreement, several people raising their phones higher to capture every moment. Emily Torres clasped her hands tightly, whispering to herself, "He can't win this anymore. Not against all of them." Judge Harrow shifted uncomfortably. His robe, once a symbol of absolute authority, now felt heavy on his shoulders. He glanced at Colonel Munro, who stood like a sentinel, unwavering, then at Rachel, whose quiet defiance burned stronger than any speech. Rachel finally spoke, her voice steady but piercing. "Your Honor, you can try to strip me of my medal, but you cannot strip me of my service, my scars, or my brothers who never came home. This silver star isn't mine alone. It belongs to every soldier who gave their life that night. Do you truly want to silence?" The room went utterly still. Harrow swallowed, his hand hovering over the gavel, but he didn't bring it down. For the first time in his career, he found himself unsure, not of the law, but of his own moral ground. The battle was no longer Rachel's alone. It was turning into a fight between arrogance and honor, and the whole nation was about to witness it. Judge Harrow leaned back in his chair, his knuckles white around the gavel. His eyes scanned the courtroom, phones raised, eyes locked, every soul waiting to see his next move. For a man who had built his reputation on control, he suddenly felt cornered. Admiral Fletcher stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "you are dangerously close to crossing into federal violation. The Department of Defense does not take kindly to judges attempting to strip veterans of their lawful honors. If you pursue this, I assure you, it will not end here. It will end in Washington." The murmurs in the gallery turned into quiet gasps. Rachel's sister, Emily, gripped the bench in front of her, whispering, "Washington, he can't survive that." Lisa Grant seized the moment, her voice firm and unyielding. "Your Honor, this case began as a simple dispute. Now, because of your personal biases, it has escalated into a constitutional crisis. Do you want to go down in history as the judge who humiliated a decorated Navy SEAL, or as the one who respected the law when it mattered most?" Rachel stood silently, her hand resting on her cane, her silver star gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence was the testimony. Judge Harrow's lips parted, but no words came. The room was no longer his to control. Every second he delayed, his authority slipped further. Finally, with a sharp crack of his gavel, he muttered, "Proceed, but the medal stays." The gallery erupted in applause, cheers echoing off the wooden panels. Emily broke down in tears, covering her mouth with her hands. Colonel Munro placed a steadying hand on Rachel's shoulder, whispering, "You held your ground. Just like always." Rachel's eyes glistened, but she stood tall. The battle wasn't just for herself, it was for every soldier whose sacrifice deserved respect. And though the judge still wore his robe, it was clear the power in that courtroom had shifted. The applause carried through the courtroom like thunder, but for Judge Harrow it sounded like defeat. His gavel strikes to restore order were drowned out by the cheers and murmurs of support for Commander Rachel Torres. For once, his bench felt less like a throne and more like a cage. Rachel lowered herself slowly into her seat, her cane resting against the table. She exhaled, steady but heavy, the weight of the last hour finally settling on her shoulders. Across from her, Lisa Grant leaned in. "We've turned the tide," she whispered. "But he won't forget this. Be ready for retaliation." Colonel Munro stayed nearby, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the judge. His presence alone was a warning. Rachel was no longer standing alone. Beside him, Admiral Fletcher sat calmly, but his silence carried the weight of unspoken authority. The Navy had drawn its line. Emily rushed to Rachel's side during the recess, hugging her tightly. "You didn't back down," she said through tears. "They all saw it. You stood taller than—" Rachel smiled faintly, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't stand for me. I stood for them, the ones who didn't come home." Her hand brushed against the medal, and for a moment her eyes clouded with memories of faces lost in the fire of war. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Judge Harrow paced furiously. His pride had been challenged in front of the world. Phones had captured everything, and he knew by nightfall the story would spread beyond the courthouse walls. He muttered under his breath, "No one embarrasses me in my courtroom." But Harrow failed to realize this wasn't just about his courtroom anymore. The struggle between his pride and Rachel's honor had ignited something far bigger. The videos would go viral, the headlines would question his judgment, and his authority would soon be tried in the court of public opinion. For Rachel, the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she knew the nation was watching. By evening, Clips from the courtroom had flooded every major platform. The hashtags #SilverStarStand and #JusticeForRachel trended nationwide. Millions had seen Judge Harrow order a decorated Navy SEAL to remove her medal, and millions had seen her refuse. At Rachel's modest home, Emily scrolled through her phone, her eyes wide. "Rachel, look, people are calling you a hero all over again. Veterans, families, even politicians are speaking out." She held up the screen where a retired general had posted, "A courtroom tried to strip her medal. America gave it back tenfold." Rachel sat quietly on the couch, Kane leaning beside her. The noise of the world didn't inflate her pride, it only deepened the ache in her chest. "I didn't do it to go viral," she said softly. "I did it because those men deserve to be remembered." Meanwhile, in his office, Judge Harrow watched the news with clenched fists. His name was plastered across headlines. "Judge orders war hero to remove medal." Commentators on every channel condemned his actions. Local veterans gathered outside the courthouse holding flags and signs that read, "Honor the fallen. Respect the living." Lisa Grant called Rachel late that night. "You should know, Washington is watching. I've had calls from congressional offices asking about the case. You're no longer just a defendant, you're a symbol." Rachel sighed, her voice weary. "Symbols are heavy, Lisa. He thinks this is about him and me, but it's not. It's about what kind of country we are." Across the city, Admiral Fletcher sat in his study, penning a formal report. His words were measured but sharp. He intended to see this judge held accountable, not just for Rachel, but for every veteran he had disrespected with that order. The battle in the courtroom was over, but a larger war was just beginning. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by a crowd, veterans in uniform, families holding photos of lost loved ones, and citizens who had seen Rachel's defiance online. All had gathered to show support. Flags waved in the breeze, and chants echoed, "Honor her, respect them all." Inside, Judge Harrow entered the courtroom to a sea of eyes heavy with judgment. His gavel strike was weak against the sound of people outside. He looked smaller now, his robe no longer commanding the fear it once had. Rachel Torres sat at the defense table, her silver star pinned firmly to her chest. Emily held her hand, while Lisa Grant prepared her papers with calm precision. Colonel Monroe and Admiral Fletcher stood at her back, symbols of an institution larger than any courtroom. Harrow cleared his throat. "After reviewing the matter, this court will no longer pursue the order to remove the medal. Commander Torres may retain her decoration without restriction." His voice cracked at the end, a mix of defeat and humiliation. The gallery erupted in applause, cheers spilling in from outside. Rachel remained composed, but her eyes shimmered with restrained emotion. She rose slowly, leaning on her cane, and faced the judge. "I didn't come here to fight you, Your Honor," she said softly but firmly. "I came here to defend the memory of those who can't stand beside me. That medal isn't mine alone, it's theirs, and no court, no gavel, no decree will ever erase that." Harrow lowered his eyes. For the first time, he seemed to understand, not as a judge, but as a man who had overstepped. Outside, as Rachel exited the courthouse, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Strangers saluted. Veterans stood straighter. Emily hugged her tightly, whispering, "They see you now. They see all of you." Rachel lifted her chin, her silver star glinting in the sunlight. She didn't smile, but her eyes held quiet pride. The battle was over, not won by force, but by courage, dignity, and truth. And in that moment, Commander Rachel Torres walked not as a defendant, but as a symbol of unbroken honor.